To the computer.
Welcome to the last episode of the Grace of Yes Book Club, one of our favorite books by our founder, none other than Lisa Hendey. And we've been having a great time, really just diving deep into this wonderful book that has aged very well. It was published about 10 years ago, and I have to say that Lisa was a prophet. Some of the things that she was talking about in this book have really come to the fore in today's culture. And so today we're covering my favorite chapter in the whole book, The Grace of No. I love to say no. I love to say no. It was very hard at the beginning, but boy, no, 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 no. You can't just jump into everything without thinking about it just because you want to be a nice person. And so that's part of what Lisa talks about in this chapter. In her very unique style, she really she's just very vulnerable as usual. And she talks about how when her kids were young, she was really like very young. She was really into I'm going to go to the school and I'm going to participate and I'm going to volunteer for all the things. And she ended up doing some committee work that she really disliked. And I have to say, I'm with her. All the marketing and sales and all of that stuff, it's just a lot. It's a lot, and it's probably a lot with children. And she just didn't enjoy it. And honestly, from my perspective and what she was writing about, her gifts weren't being used in that, and that may have been a big part of that situation. But anyway, she eventually said no to that committee work, and saying that no opened up for her a completely different opportunity. She went to work on the school website. And the thing that makes me laugh about that is that she volunteers the information that she went to go do it, but she didn't know anything about it. So she was learning along the way and figuring it out. And we know the fruit of that is that she's probably one of the most tech savvy Catholic influencers that has had an incredible longevity and career in that market. So, you know, a no led to that huge yes. Um, so one of the things that she talks about is having this yes mindset. And I admit that sometimes I fall into that myself. This idea that if they're asking you, of course you can do it. And before you know it, you've got like 5,000 commitments, and how are you going to get them all done? Um, but as a result of that, as a result of the busyness that comes from that yes mindset, is this idea that a very kind, and this is a quote from the book, a kind, well-intentioned no is a necessary part of the bedrock of a life devoted to giving God our full and worthy yes. So why? Why is that, why is that such an important thing? Well, she kind of goes into this idea that sometimes we give our yes to situations because of our own insecurity. We don't want to be perceived as someone that is not a team player or that doesn't support, what's going on. But in fact, it's saying no that is a different opportunity. What you're saying no to in this point opens a yes to something else. And she illustrates this whole kind of tension between the yes and the no with a story of a friend of hers, Steve. And Steve was given this opportunity to be a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and he threw his everything into the yes to move to the other side of the world and to work with young seminarians, giving them instruction. I think it was in English and maybe a little bit of catechesis as well. And he was about halfway through his mission when his beloved aunt became ill and needed him, and he was her caregiver. And so he was kind of caught in that tension of, I have a responsibility to my aunt, but I also have a responsibility to this yes that I've given to be teaching at the seminary. And he followed his heart, right? He did the right thing for his aunt and for himself, but at great cost to him in giving up something that he had poured so much of himself into. But he chose love, right, over the unknown. And what that did to Steve was really open up uh, just a Pandora's box of the unknown because he didn't have a job to return to, and he was going to have to face the uncertainty of what his aunt's needs were, and and yet he said yes to that. So he said no, right, to working in this mission field, but that was to say yes to someone who very much needed him. So that's a big story that she tells, and we're going to have to come back to that because later on in this chapter we'll talk about what we say no to and what we say yes to, and what that cost us sometimes. Because there's always a trade-off in those situations. Later in the chapter, she talks about, and I love the title that she uses, affluenza. And it's a combination of affluent and influence. And that kind of travels like an illness. And I remember she talks about this young man who I think he had committed murder. He'd committed a crime, and he got caught in a situation where he was saying, well, this is, I have money, I have influence, I have the availability to do all of these things. It's not my fault. And it's kind of a startling news story. But in it, what she talks about is how we kind of get caught up in just saying yes as parents to all of the whims that are popular at the time and that our children want. And so she talks a little bit about how in her family life, they had to, she and her husband had to set boundaries and limits to things just because, when I was a kid, I remember Tommy's mommy said he can do it. Well, I'm not Tommy's mommy. And so it kind of becomes that situation where because we perhaps have the means or because a lot of things are available to our children doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do it. And so there's a parental no that is necessary for us, and that this parental no comes with being able to set boundaries, being able to set expectations for our children, being able to set limits. And what's interesting in that is that, I mean, I kind of learned it too late, but it's something that I think I would integrate if I could. She talks about how she teaches, Christian values in their home with language. And when there's something that, that she and Greg did not agree with, or that it was something that was just, not anything that they wanted to participate in, the language that they used was, in our family, we don't. And so what a great way to teach these values to the kids. In our family. We don't answer rudely to other people. In our family, we don't have to buy the latest video game. In our family, you don't have to have a car when you turn 16. And those are not her examples, but it's things that I would have liked to have had that tool at my disposal at the time, because I think it's a great way to be able to talk to the children in a way that begins to instill values. And so I thought that was pretty good. What I was not expecting was how that turned into her discussion on confession and reconciliation. And I'm curious about how y'all feel about that because sin is also that uh, crossing a line of expectation. You know, we know what the moral thing is. We know what the moral good is. We know how we need to be behaving, and yet, um, we fall and we do commit sin, and that's a big no-no, right? But there's also the opportunity for forgiveness, and there's the opportunity to go into reconciliation. And so I thought that that was an interesting way to move through setting limits. Um, but I think I'd like to really talk about that later because I think it's a great concept of how sometimes we're saying yes to things that we should be saying no to. From there, she moves on to something that I thought was really cool. And she talks about being so heavenly minded that we're not paying attention to earthly things, right? Being so heavenly minded that we're not paying attention to earthly things. And it's a strange sacrifice that sometimes we make because it is sacrificial and like for no good reason. All right. So what does that mean to be heavenly minded um, and not paying attention to earthly things? Um, we should be saying no to those things, to those activities or requirements for us that create a hardship, particularly if it's creating a hardship for the family. And so she offers this as an opportunity to discern the no. And so I think that this is really the money piece of the chapter, discerning when you say no. And so she offers three questions to ponder. First is, how will this situation touch my soul? How will this situation touch my soul? The second question to ponder is, how does this impact my primary vocation as wife and mother? And so that goes back to that heavenly minded, saying yes to providing dinner for for an evening or for a family or for someone in need, and then your family is wanting for dinner. Um, I think that may be one of the examples that she gave, but so how does this impact my primary vocation as wife and mother? Am I spending so much time on this activity that I'm neglecting my family? And then the third one is, how does this situation impact other commitments? It may be something that's very exciting to do, or it may be something that really speaks to your heart, but you've already got four other commitments that you're involved in. And so sometimes when we're doing too many things, we're not doing them well, or we're burning out, or it's impacting our families, or it's impacting relationships. And so I think that those three questions are really key and really come in clutch in the money quote from the book. Um, the last piece of this chapter, I think, was very interesting because it's something that some of us need to hear. And it's about saying no to ourselves, but saying no to ourselves in a different angle. It's this chapter or this part of the chapter is part self-care and part recognizing that sin requires that we turn to God. And so this chapter addresses some issues that perhaps need professional intervention, but also challenges us to give ourselves over to God. So if there's something that, that's harming us in some way, absolutely, we need to pursue that professional care, but that there's also a spiritual healing that comes from God that is essential to that. So at the end, the challenge is how we give ourselves over to God. So let's move on to discussing the questions in this chapter. Back? Welcome back, and let's finish off this fantastic book. Um, The Grace of Rebirth is the last chapter, and I think that that's awesome as a label there for moving on to new things, to be new, to be made new. And again, Lisa's incredible vulnerability comes through in her opening story that she says in this section, because in this chapter, because she shares about a friend who had left the faith, and and that she has some deep regrets about how she handled that, um, and not just handling how he left the faith, but when he approached her later, some years later, where he was being called back in some way. Um, that she felt that she didn't handle it well. She gave him all kinds of resources in her enthusiasm, and in her joy and enthusiasm for his return to the faith. Um, just told him a bunch of books to read and everything like that. And then the next day she finds herself sitting in Mass, uh, looking at the empty space next to her in the pew, and she thought, I could have asked him to join me. I could have gone to get him and invited him for coffee afterwards. And so she she ponders that sometimes she answers God's call with the minimum. And that really that struck me so hard, because I had to think about in my own life all the times that I said yes to God. Yeah, yes, yes, but phoning it in. And what a missed opportunity. Um, so she has to struggle with that, and forgiving herself for that too. But, it also becomes a learning opportunity for us when we do things like that. And we have the self-awareness to work through that and think about the way that we are responding, not just to give a yes, but to give a real yes, right? And so she goes on in that part of the chapter with some wonderful examples of people that she sees that could model that, and she ends that section with a conversation with her pastor, Father Greg, when she's thinking about what it means to give a yes, and how giving a total yes to God comes with risk. It comes with great risk, because you really don't know really what the outcome of that yes is going to be. And many of our choices come with a trade-off in some other area. And so she quotes Father Greg's words to her, which are, "Brace yourself, Lisa, for giving a true yes." And honestly, that has certainly been my experience in my life when I have given a yes that was a 100% yes. The outcomes were unexpected, but unexpectedly abundant. And so, when you give your yes to God, He's going to take you on a whirlwind trip with it. The next section of the book, I love this because Lisa still, so many years later, is holding on to this dream of becoming a survivor. The television show Survivor, and she talks about some really interesting elements here, because a lot of her motivation is to become a missionary. And so I'm reading this and I'm cracking up and I'm thinking, so you're going on Survivor, where you're going to be out in some kind of strange circumstances, uh, in the wild, and you're going as a missionary. And she goes on to explain why. And that is that on this show, in order to win, you basically have to be unethical and unkind, and just be all for yourself in this game. For those of you who are not familiar with Survivor, you end up on these teams of people who are placed on islands or woods or some other natural environment in which all of the comforts of life have been removed, and you have to play these games and do these challenges, and sometimes in order to win, you cheat, or you somehow you know cut deals that are going to hurt people on your team for you to be able to survive at the end of a particular episode, where they vote on the people who get to stay on the island or leave. And so you have to make strange bedfellows, if you will. And it's just an unusual situation. And she says that for her, the challenge is to go on Survivor and be honest and not try to cheat. And so she illustrates that being in the culture is the same thing, like that we're survivors in the world because the challenge is to be taking advantage of evangelization opportunities while being a missionary in the world. So that was a pretty cool, that was a pretty cool, I don't know. I think she just wanted to talk about, I hope she doesn't watch this. I think that Lisa just wants to be on Survivor. And that's how I feel about it. But she is a missionary. Um, she's not a traditional missionary, but she's certainly a digital missionary. And so I think that dream has come true for her. And then she moves on to talk about the steps along the path to yes. What are the things that we have to do to give our yes? And I love this one observation from her in the book because she says that she recognizes that being generous to God's will doesn't always look substantive. Wow. Our yeses don't have to be these big dramatic yeses. Sometimes they can be very, very small yeses that are very powerful and that maybe nobody even knows anything about. And I think that perhaps those are the most powerful ones. Um, and then she gives us a little bit of encouragement, checking out our time here. Um, she notes that our ability to give our yes to God is always a work in progress. So there's no right way to do it. There's no culminating way to do it. There's no final way to do it. It's a journey of steps along the path to heaven. And so it's a recommitment to that yes. And so this is another, excuse me, this is another spot in that book of her vulnerability, um, because she confesses that some days she feels that she hasn't done enough. And that resonates with me, because, if you do an examine at the end of the day, and you look back on what you've done that day and what you've achieved and what you call an achievement versus maybe what God appreciates in the work that you've done. She says that sometimes that she's fallen short of that. And so we end the chapter and we end the book with her recognition that living life with this yes to God's will is not a checklist. It's not a to-do list where you have achieved all of these things, but rather that it is a path that you have to allow yourself to be veered off in order to see where God's grace really comes into play. If you live your life with this checklist of all of these things that you're going to accomplish, you're giving short shrift to God and the amazing grace that He has in store for you. If you open yourself to that path. So that's a beautiful way to end the book, and a beautiful spot for us to ponder some of the questions that she's listed for us. Well, thank you all for joining us for the Catholic Mom Book Club featuring Lisa Hendey's The Grace of Yes, published by Ave Maria Press. And we'll have lots of resources available for you to look at videos and to hope that you would host a book club at your own parish and your own women's group. So let's end with a prayer. Let's end with a prayer that was Lisa's last prayer in the book. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Abba, Father, lover of my soul, I give you myself, my life, and my love, exactly as I am, and with a vision of all. Oh my goodness, I just lost it. You can't do anything live, ladies, can you? Oh, all right, let's start it again. Abba, Father, lover of my soul, I give you myself, my life, and my love, exactly as I am, and with a vision of all I hope to be, in, with, and through you. Marred by my human condition and weakness, I offer you the best of all that you have placed within me as a sign of my love and endless gratitude. May I follow the teachings of your Son, Jesus. May I emulate the spotless yes of his mother, Mary. May I serve as a light of the love you shine upon each of us. And may my path lead me ever closer to an eternity spent with you. I love you, Lord. I give you my eternal yes. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And thanks again. And you'll have
Oh,
to
yeah.
catch us live for these boo-boos.
One more question. I thought you said